I did not do it. I could have done that, huh?
I could. You did it off your computer?
Oh, I did it on my computer, but I was thinking, since I did it on the computer, I could have recorded through the phone.
But yeah, as long as your microphone is okay, then
yeah,
that would be fine.
It should be good. She said she could hear me good. I could hear her good. So something that hit me during that was how I had all these ideas in my head of I can never do a virtual podcast because if I'm so much like need to see the person right there with them, and the lag of doing some sort of a virtual thing, it would be too much for me, right? This is a whole story I'd made up in my head.
Besides Zoom, or
Zoom? Just through anything, through Zoom, through FaceTime, through this is again very much in the Paul way of like you just make assumptions that based in nothing because you never even tried it. I never tried it. And what hit me today, 10 minutes into doing this thing with Sharon, was like, this feels so intimate. I feel like you're sitting right across from me, just as we are now, in 4-dimensional space-time, sitting right across. I was totally lost in it in such a cool way, and I was just like, it so quickly, and Zoom obviously existed before the pandemic, but it hit me like the whole world is just the other side of your screen away. You could talk to somebody on the other side of the planet and have a great, and I just had put all that into a certain box in my mind of like, no, those are phone calls, those aren't as intimate as face to face, but it felt pretty damn intimate today.
Yeah, I mean, I got to talk to Sharon. We hung out for a little bit.
She mentioned it on the podcast.
So and part of it's that we know each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how it would do with somebody totally new. Mm-hmm. But then that opportunity of what, if it's that okay on Zoom on a 2-dimensional screen, how much might we be more present for in our 3D bodily meeting that we're taking for granted, and certainly plenty of people do, right, that don't get to know each other at all, that in a weird way, we call it it's like the Janus God facing each way, because the disadvantage with the 2D thing is you're comfortable being alone.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And that's actually what's part of what's allowing people to connect. Like, oh, I get to be in my home, I don't have to go anywhere, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, because Greg had this funny post that he shared on Facebook of a sheepdog sitting in front of a TV, looking at a bunch of sheep facing him, and the caption was, "I'm at work."
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So so it's funny that it's not strange for us that we're doing that.
Yeah. Well, what hit me so crazy was I thought I would be so immune to it because I'm very much a anti-social media. I don't have any Facebook, any Twitter, anything. It's funny, I've always said I don't like talking on the phone, but more and more, I had a 2.5-hour conversation with Keith on the phone the other day.
He's a good phone talker.
He's an amazing phone talker. He's like an 8.
He's like the only person I can talk to on the phone.
Me too. I know. But slowly I'm finding myself even having a little 30-minute conversation, an hour-long conversation there with people since the pandemic, and all these ideas that I had of just like, this is, very rigid, this is who I am, I'm not this person. I'm surprising myself. The Zoom was the hardest case today of like, oh man, this feels so natural, and I had a whole library of ideas of why it wasn't going to be, and it feels very damn natural, and
and it's the advantage, which is great, whatever it is, that just enjoying it, regardless, like if you just like techie stuff and not poo-pooing anything, and then the advantage of seeing what it's showing us that we're missing, like I was saying, that like I think you mentioned this with Patrick, or whoever, the ability to get used to something and we're not noticing our downhill.
Yeah. The unconscious stuff that's going.
That we're
being missed.
So things being moved more and more to screens and indoors, and I mean, like a drug feels great, right?
Of course, while you're on it.
Right, exactly. Yes. And we don't recognize that, especially for those that have become, used to them, that need them or whatever, it's because they weren't noticing what was pleasurable, and then that repression, denial ended up needing the drugs.
Yes.
To show them this is happiness, and that's perfectly good and great, right? But then there's this the window up, the advantage of also looking back at, okay, when it becomes a problem, it's like, oh well, was I reliant on them for other reasons? Did break a window open because I had, clenched down on one over here.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying this is all still very new to me.
It's all very new to everybody.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So
yeah,
I'm very comfortable. Zoom. Who's zooming who? This is great.
It's great. Hey, and by the way, I never responded to your text.
Did you get that?
Of course I know Aretha Franklin. I'm not too young. I say all the time. She's my favorite female vocalist probably in history. Oh yeah. She just I hear her voice and it's just head to toe it. You know what I mean? She's got that deep, so soulful. A thing I like to say, it's not technical, musical or whatever, but like when I hear someone sing, the filter between like soul and voice, the less filter I feel there, the more it's just straight mainstream in their soul. Is that, and then she of course is up there. Now another one on the other end of the spectrum, which this is about as far the other end of the spectrum as you can get. It's embarrassing to admit, but I'm gonna put it out there to the dream talking world. Is Sia? Do you know Sia?
Never heard that.
Okay, you probably have, but you don't know it.
Sia.
She doesn't show her face. All of her stuff, she's got a mask on all the time, and all of her music videos, she doesn't show her face. Huh. So she's, this is embarrassing. She did the song I'm gonna swing from the chandelier. If I played it, you'd know. So again, now she's the other end, very high voice, even screechy, even her voice cracks sometimes. But it's so raw and so just again straight from the soul that Aretha Franklin's a very deep, like earthy boom. You feel the soul, and she's at the other end of up there in the ether, very high and screechy. But in either case, when I hear them sing, it's just like. You feel them. And
you're listening to it then.
Yeah, I'll send you some stuff for sure.
Yeah, and then that whole idea of the use of soul, like, and the conventional idea is you rejected the techie stuff because you're not supposed to be on the phone or on screens or whatever.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to, be body to body. But an advantage of Zoom is breaking our conventional assumptions of whatever, like I'm bad if I'm not paying attention, looking, person in the eyes or something like that.
Yeah.
And oddly, Zoom, in the adjustments of like looking at this avatar's box on the screen to see if the view is okay or the hair's okay, whatever, right?
Yeah.
That I can't directly see it. Because directly see it, I have to look right in the camera.
And everyone knows you're looking at yourself.
No, because
you can't even see
I don't think I'm looking at myself.
Because
I can't see myself.
I got you, yeah.
And then, but the idea will certainly come. Oh my God, people are now. Because I actually did this with Paul and Amelia. Does it look like I'm looking right in your eyes right now? And they said yes, of course, right? And so I'll play with that. Imagine looking people in the eyes, and that leads to relying on the vocal tones and paying attention only to the words, and then the realization, well, deaf people get to pay attention. I mean, blind people get to pay attention too, without being able to, being able to see, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of playing around is just kind of fascinating to me.
Totally.
And how it, leads back then to what does that mean about our most common experience of body to body and the conventional wisdom of full
baseline
human body presence, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know what that means, but
yeah,
I'm very curious.
Of course, man.
So.
Yeah, I talked with Sharon about this earlier about headless way stuff. It gives a whole new twist to headless way.
You say you do that. You look for your head every day.
It's my favorite fucking thing. My list of hobbies. I'm like the weirdest. Hippie. My list of hobbies are meditating, doing Sam Harris's meditation, going for a walk in the park, watching the cherry blossoms fall, and looking for my own head.
Yep.
That's like that beats out any clubbing, any concerts, any traveling. I'm literally a giant kid. Like,
yeah.
But yeah, the headless way stuff. Sam Harris's app. I can't think of his name right now. This is twice today. I forgot his name. But the disciple of Douglas Harding. Douglas Harding.
His disciple?
Douglas Harding was the guy that came up with the headless way book.
Yeah.
And then he had I call him a disciple,
right,
but a student
right.
that kind of passed along the story, and or the teachings. They call it the science of first person, or the science
That's what they call it?
Yeah, I think he calls it the science of the first person.
Yeah.
Pretty cool, right? Or the science of subjectivity.
Because it has very tangible.
Yeah, it's looking at it as if you were a scientist. You're objectively looking at subjectivity, if that's one way. On present evidence alone. Yeah. What do I experience? What do I experience when I look from my own head? And then so that right there, that's worth the price of admission.
Oh my God, I was totally tripped out by that practice that Roman mentioned about imagine your eyeballs
falling
coming out of your shoulders and your brain floating out. Oh my God, I just it was all like.
Yeah, that's a heavy one, dude. That's a heavy one. I don't do that one every day because it's like.
Well, it was funny because I've tried to wonder would it mean to have eyeballs be able to be out and looking, especially or one eyeball looking back on the other one.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
And I can't actually, get my head around it.
Yeah, of course. I don't think anybody can, and that's the point, right? But yeah, so looking for your own head, and then and as we're talking about the zoom, it gets back on the cool little variations of that. So the most low tech thing you can do is look at a reflection, right? Look at your reflection in water or whatever. And a couple cool things there is like if you look away from the reflection and then you look back at yourself right in the eyes, you'll never see your eyes move. Because something, obviously.
You might imagine that you see it or something like that, right?
But and I think even like some sort of a brain gamesy type thing, like the brain will edit even if there was some chance of catching something, it just fills in the blanks of like, no, you didn't see that. Like it goes right back to seeing your eyes right where they're. So that's a fun.
I think that's what's similar about looking directly at the camera.
I think that's exactly what I was thinking of when you were bringing
it up. I can't see what I'm actually like.
Yeah. And then getting back to the headless way, think of like, so then where am I? Where do I stand? Where is my ultimate avatar? Or where is my ultimate, standing place? And then it's just more fun of pointing back to the emptiness or the headlessness or to me. So okay, anyway. So I thought on the way over here about I'm not going to I'm experimenting with trying different things with the podcast, and I said this to Sharon and she said that no, I'm totally off base, but I'm starting to believe that I like the idea of getting a biographical story of my guests more, because it's for me, I enjoy hearing it and I enjoy hearing it on other podcasts, and then also it makes me not talk so damn much, and it gives me an opportunity to get to know somebody in a way that you, even with your closest friends, you never really go, hey, like, give me a story from the beginning, like it would just kind of be weird to do, but this is an excuse to do it. Like, hey, let me introduce you. And we have
why did Sharon object?
So Sharon started with when she was 10 or 11 years old, and somebody gave her LSD by accident. I know.
God, was she okay?
Well, exactly. I was like, okay. She goes on to explain how it was this amazing healing experience, and I said, hey, disclaimer,
yeah.
Don't give your kid, or if you're 10 or 11 out there, don't do it.
That's fine, wish them out.
Yeah. So that's the first thing.
It was an accident. They didn't do it on purpose, right?
No, yeah, it was an accident. And what's funny is what came up for me that I never was able to say to her, I don't know why, but my mom has a similar experience that someone gave her LSD when she was 14, and she didn't know what anything was. This is like in Minnesota or Michigan in the 70s, and some guy at a bowling alley said, hey, you like getting high? And she had never smoked weed, nothing, and said, yeah, sure, I like getting high. She didn't know what she was saying. She didn't know anything, and he gave her. She put all the pieces together later on, So it started to hit her as she was picked up by her, I want to say her uncle or her great uncle or something, or her grandpa, and brought home, and she's tripping on LSD, sitting on the couch watching some show or whatever, and yeah, and it wasn't as positive an experience for her. And I think she said her cousin recognized what was going on because he was a little older. He was like in his older younger 20s, and he took her to his room and basically, coached her through the rest of it and sat it,
just to
wrote
mellow
it out.
her out.
Yeah, mellow her out, wrote it out, as best as he could. He was her shaman, whether either of them had signed up for that at the beginning of the day. And then my mom, now many years later, she did LSD, again, she was a deadhead, so here we are, Hayden Ashbury, and this is, the historic stomping grounds. And then it hit her in her 20s of like, oh, that's what happened when I was 14. She didn't even know what it was. It took her that long. I had this insane experience. It felt like a near-death-like experience. I put it away in a box, never talked to anybody about it. And then once she did acid later on, she goes, oh, someone gave me acid when I was 14.
Oh, so even though her cousin took care of her, she never found out.
I guess they just didn't talk about it. It was just some
post follow up there.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of unanswered questions. And then my mom obviously became spiritually inclined somewhat. That's what got her into the church. That was the cult that I grew up in. Yada yada. But all that came up for me, and here I am. Right after I said how I'm gonna hear about your biographical story, I start talking about my mom.
That's a juicy one.
It's crazy, right?
But no, why did she object to the idea of doing that?
Because she says, which I kind of agree with. So the podcast I like listening to, you listen to them again and again because of the hosts, right? Because even if they tell the same story again and again, you come back for them, right? And then the guests are just, so she said obviously don't talk the whole time anyway, but don't be afraid to repeat stories or whatever. That was kind of her little take on it.
For you to repeat stories?
Yeah, like I just told a story that I just told on the last podcast. You know what I mean? Like, shut the hell up and let the guest talk. So, all that is a setup to say the question that seems to be very fruitful for me so far in this is I like to ask people something along the lines of, when did you first get a hint that there was something else going on? You could say the first, the blue pill in the Matrix. Like you believed you were in the Matrix, then all of a sudden you got a little bit of a hint of, oh, maybe, I'm not, in the Matrix, but I'm the one watching it, right? And so for a lot of people, maybe they've never been asked that. So they go inside and go, when was it? So that's my offering for you.
I mean, my my experience is overridden by the drug taking. So that was, I mean, that was blown out of the water. That was obviously the case. That was more real than this experience of being real. Like, I can still remember that, even though I can say this feels real.
Yeah,
right?
That feels more. I have a similar experience.
So it's not like I'm always relying on that memory to remind me that this isn't as real as that was. But it was so blown out of the water on many occasions in many ways.
Obvious.
Yeah, but I could offer I could see a lead up, so to speak.
I'm gonna readjust them.
You're gonna what?
I'm gonna readjust them. Let's try this.
You're just moving the phone. I think we're gonna read.
Go ahead, tell your story. Okay.
I can make up a story of things leading up, because this was pretty unusual at the time, where I was with a friend who was insisting his view overlooking the Nevada desert, we were going up ski slopes chairs, was green, and it was brown. It was desert, so I thought it was supposed to be brown anyway. It was dry, right? And I had never worn sunglasses up to that point. And he was wearing them, and for some reason I borrowed them. And that was the first time I knew that sunglasses could change color.
Yeah.
So talk about, realizing, that story of he's colorblind. I said, you're colorblind, to realizing something so totally different that I had never experienced.
And this is like what age?
That was 18.
18.
Or 20 even, probably 20.
Okay.
So, so it's not like let's say even backing up to it's probably freshman year in high school. I know it's sophomore, because I had met this cool family that I became close to, and they were Protestant, and didn't believe Catholic were actually Christian. So that was like sunglasses. It was all a whole new experience.
They had the Protestant glasses.
Yeah,
and you grew up Catholic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I never heard this idea of like not taking Jesus down from the cross, and but anyway, they were a cool family. It was a really important part of my life, where I even just did as best as I could. Yes, I accept Jesus into my heart, like they were suggesting.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't remember if it was before or after that. There was just this recognition of I don't have to know why or prove what happiness is. I just accept it.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was, I think I'd had this major depression just not long before that.
Mm-hmm.
So there was, I can't remember how that dovetailed with the Jesus thing, because that didn't work out.
Yeah,
and for that matter, happiness didn't work out for a long time either, right?
I'm sure they were tied together.
Yeah, because
there's faith in both, right?
Yeah. But but the what has faith was way down the road, right?
Yeah,
so
he wasn't even going to be looked at for a while.
Yeah.
That wasn't going to be looked at for a while.
Yeah.
That's cool, man. Okay.
So I mean, there's just like so much that
comes up.
Then of course, learning about other spiritualities, and stuff. And I try to remember, as far as the drug experiences, there was one different one, other than being really high and really loving and stuff fun or whatever like that.
Okay, so just because it's interesting to me, what drugs, what ages?
So I didn't do drugs. I didn't even drink because my father was an alcoholic. So I thought I was one of those that wasn't going to do that.
Yeah.
And so I started drinking in college, and that was nothing profound. And
not much comes from drinking, I think, for too
not
many
for
people.
me.
Yeah.
And pot and cocaine didn't do anything for me. It wasn't until crystal meth, which really everything made sense. And it was a really actually very physically relaxing drug. So it might have some kind of like you give Ritalin for certain things. So I was just really comfortable, and my whole life would be figured out, and I knew why we were friends, and everything that I said made sense because what you said made sense, and it was just it was really great. But then suicidal afterwards, which the friend that gave me that the first time never told me. So
he didn't tell you what it was,
or what the effects were. No.
Oh,
yeah, it didn't tell me much, and I was left on my own afterwards, not realizing.
God,
and it did that to me.
Scary, man. I know.
Yeah, so that was the drug of not choice, as far as I did it a lot, and it had the most
getting back to what we were
horrible effects. Yeah. But then MDMA was super warm and loving and present, So that was that.
And not as much of a.
Oh, nothing of a come down until I started doing too much, and then I kind of started getting these electrical ants afterwards.
Yeah. Totally.
But comparatively speaking, no, nothing.
Yeah, because I've never done meth or coke, actually. The most non-psychedelic high drug I've done is MDMA. Kind of like I call it like a high, So when I take it, I don't know if you feel. I almost feel like a superhero. Like
MDMA?
Yeah. Oh. And so when you said...
That sounds more like meth to me.
Maybe I'm going to need that. So when you said crystal, you explained the way that I feel on MDMA.
Yeah.
Everything makes sense. I know why it makes sense.
Yeah.
And then also no fear. Like you feel like a superhero in that. And that's why I've heard some people talk about why they use it for therapy.
Yeah.
Why it's so helpful is... we in our normal sober consciousness create walls around. We never go and look at what's on the other side of that wall. We just don't look there because that's if we look there, then it's our whole world's gonna fall apart. And then MDMA will just make you go, oh wait, why the hell was I so scared of that? And you jump over the wall and you go, oh yeah, we can handle this, we got this, and you can face things you never faced, and you can work through stuff, and then obviously you are going to come down, but now that stuff that was so repressed that couldn't even be looked at has now been looked at, and you survived it, and then that's the quote integration of like how can you then take this on with your normal sober life of the lessons that you've learned from it.
Yeah, that's the fascinating thing with drugs in context with non-duality, as far as the opportunity for those that avenue is available, because the drug is not you,
Yeah.
So you're
you're clear about that.
Yeah. You're clear about that,
Yeah.
right? And actually, for addicts, in the end, that's, you get stuck though in relying on them.
Yeah.
But it still wasn't you weren't in charge of your own, superhero spiritual progress. I never thought of myself as a particularly spiritual person.
Mm-hmm.
So it allowed that to come in because the drugs did it to me.
Yeah, exactly. It puts you there, and then we're here, so.
So the therapy and all that, it makes total sense. And
totally.
then, and then the other people that have an odd difficulty because they think they were the ones all the time that were meditating or whatever, that don't get that opportunity, but they don't have the drug problem. So
pick your poison.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it's interesting that you can never really say one thing or the other, but putting the juxtaposing the two can give a hit of why it's not this way or that way.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you have some experience with both, you can see the benefit and drawbacks of both.
Yeah, especially in retrospect. So it's better probably to listen to somebody else and learn from in some way, right, than having to repeat the experience.
Totally. Or you could do a whole lot of that and maybe just do a little bit of your own experience.
Yeah, right. Much. Yeah, because it's
get more bang for your buck.
Yeah, because there's a seed of everything and everything, right? So like your tiny bit of maybe experimenting, you'll see what was being said. You won't feel or you'll recognize the warning or whatever.
Dude, okay, so I was re-listening to Michael Pollan. Are you familiar with Michael Pollan? Mm-hmm. He put a book out about 2 years ago called How to Change Your Mind, and it's about psychedelic drugs. He was a guy in his 50s, so he's famous writer for like nature and food. He's like the premier writer on food of our generation. He wrote Cooked, The Omnivore's Dilemma, a whole bunch of stuff about food. And he's out of Berkeley, is why he's big in my world, is that he lives right down the street from the Cheese Board and the original Pete's and all that, which I grew up in that area. So I've seen him in passing here and there, and he's a 5-time over New York Times best-selling writer. So his main thing's always kind of been like gardening and food, and he's a very incredibly deep thinker of like the bigger picture on that. And he did a thing on caffeine recently, which was so crazy, how like caffeine was responsible for the Renaissance and like and like the scientific revolution. It's so fucking cool. Yeah. And so he did a thing on psychedelics a few years ago that a lot of people were like, this is a departure. Like, you're normally talking about coffee and gardening and food, and now you're talking about psychedelic drugs.
Homegrown?
Yeah, right. And he goes, well, it's not really a departure to me because I've always written about nature and humans' interaction with nature, and when we interact with nature, how we use it to learn things about ourselves, and how we evolve and revolutionize how nature responds to that, right? So that's agriculture, that's everything all the way down the line, right? So anyway, I went back to listening to some of his stuff. So when he wrote the book on psychedelics about 2 years ago, a lot of people were saying, okay, now even the adults are doing it. You know what I mean? That it had been a counterculture thing for so long. In the 60s and the 70s, the very long drought, and then more recently, the big CEOs in Silicon Valley and all these people are talking about microdosing, and it's starting to become. And so for a lot of people, it became, when Michael Pollan wrote the book about doing psychedelics, the adults are doing it now. It's breaking into the mainstream, and in a way it kind of hasn't up to this point, because he, even though he grew up in New York and he's lived in Berkeley all this time, he never did any drugs. He never smoked pot. He never.
Wow.
Yeah, until his late 50s.
Wow.
Yeah, so all of that is to say, he wrote this book, and now a whole lot of people that were products of the DARE generation, don't do drugs, and if you do LSD, you're gonna think you're a piece of toast or whatever the hell. All those all the propaganda of that time. And now those people are even like, wow, okay, if Michael Pollan, got over it and went and did this and had all these amazing experiences, maybe I should too. And so more and more over these last couple of years, people with so much more. I talked with Patrick about this because he said he didn't do anything until his 30s, that he had a foundation in a way that a lot of us You know, I first took mushrooms when I was 17 or 18. I didn't know anything. Like, I was just like, whoa, here we go. You know, like, in that way you were talking about, I said, you always knew it was other than you. I was pretty convinced I was mushrooms. Like, the first time I was like, Nick's gone.
A big mushroom?
Yeah. Nick's gone. I'm whatever this is now.
Well,
this is what it's going to be forever. Yeah.
Because, you know, because that's what happened to me on ketamine, that I wasn't ketamine, but, and I'm not sure if the context of having had enough, some kind of spirituality, oneness or something, allowed it to be remembered at this point this way, that I was with whatever, like, especially the visual field. That's how I remember. There was it's like the headless wave, essentially. It was like the headless wave without the headless wave.
Yeah.
So that, so not being told anything about it, not having expectations or whatever, in some ways allowed, you know.
That's available. The disappearance of any person taking the ketamine is you could say you're just a ketamine, you could just say you're just nothing, which we kind of are already. But okay, so why was I getting into Michael Pollan? Because he was talking about let's say you read the entire, you've never done a psychedelic, you read the entire book, you know all the studies, you know all the everything. In some ways, it is a dichotomy in that you could be bringing a lot of baggage and a lot of expectations into it, but what a lot of the set and setting, right, the mindset and the setting that you do the drugs in, if you really do take that serious enough, you can just go in with the idea of, this is an exploration of my conscious experience. What does it have to offer? You know, and that's kind of the punchline of his book, right? It's not gonna make you better. It's not going to just purely. It's almost like give it up to God. Like what do you got to offer? I'm all ears. You know, in a non-personal and a non-whatever way. So when as you were explaining your experiences, it made me think of the fact of like what a lot of these people that are reading his book and then doing the psychedelics and reporting back are talking about, is there's this theme of there's clinical research on this. Some people they call it like the unified theory of mental health, right? That's an interesting name just on its own, right? And the idea is that in mental health, it's a spectrum. On one end, there's too much certainty, there's too much structure, there's too much conservative, I got it all together, I got it all figured out, and that is depression. Or it's also kind of anxiety. It's two sides of the same thing of like, I know what's going to happen, or I know that I don't know what's going to happen. You're contracted would be the metaphor I would use. They don't use that, but you're completely contracted, you got it all figured out. There's no chance or hope for anything else, so you're utterly fucked, right? And one thing that psychedelics, so that's when you have a bad case of depression or anxiety in a sober state, it's very hard to break out of that. It's a reinforcing feedback loop of I'm fucked. You know, I'm depressed because I'm depressed. I'm anxious because I'm anxious. And what more and more people in this new field of psychedelics are realizing is that if you do MDMA, mushrooms, even LSD, it gives you an opportunity to swing to the other end of the perspective of, I have no idea. All my ideas of I'm sure that I'm depressed and I have a million reasons of why, I'm sure I'm anxious, that completely gets wiped away, and you're completely in the total unknowing. But it's an unknowing of like, I'm unknown, there's unknowing, and there's nothing I can do about it. You know what I mean? And so now if you stay there, let's say,
knowing is the idea that knowing is important is what gets broken, right?
Exactly. That's what becomes important. The knowing that's important. When you swing to the other side, let's say you never come back, and I actually think I have a buddy that swung to the other side and didn't come back to an equilibrium enough. You end up in magical thinking. You end up in kind of like a paranoid, like you start thinking that everything's speaking to you in a way, and you take that a little too seriously. Like, oh, this guy on the TV told me to to join a Ponzi scheme, and so I'm going to do it. Like, you swing so much on the other end of uncertainty that you're open to everything that you kind of can't function. And so that the word that comes to mind is magical thinking, or just sort of and schizophrenia maybe would be that side. And so the I wish I knew the name of the guy. He's somebody out of UC Berkeley, but the unified theory of mental health is finding your balance between those two worlds, and having the flexibility to go somewhere but still find your anchor. Go into the very structured, I've got it all figured out, but kind of have the awareness that you're there, and come back to your quote centerless center. Swing into the magical thinking, maybe doing it with psychedelic drugs, maybe doing it with meditation, or whatever, with therapy, guided therapy, but come back to your center. So as you were, I couldn't help but, that just popped up, I couldn't help but dive into that when you were talking about your own sort of rough experience with being introduced to that through in your own world through psychedelics and meth and MDMA, of like it finally gives you a chance to swing through that spectrum more than in just being stuck in the depression or the
Yeah, I was going to actually comment on the word on swing, because whether it's personal or collective, societal, there's that issue of swinging, the two polarities, right? Because it's kind of like using a metaphor of emergency surgery, that if it's needed, it's needed, and that's where drugs come in. And then, of course, what drugs we're talking about is part of the question, but it's life performing emergency surgery on somebody that doesn't know that they have a problem, or that they're getting emergency surgery. So it's not to the person to be describing this, except to contextualize it, that it's kind of like Paul talking over the head, right? If you're not going to determine whether you need emergency spiritual surgery, and somebody's going to misuse the idea, like, oh yeah, I do need it, But behind that is like one of the earliest experiments on LSD was the Marsh Chapel experiment, and they didn't have much context for what, and they did like make a nice environment, good music and stuff like that. So I don't know if my story is totally accurate, but what was surprising was like 9 out of 10 of the people that were involved went on to become like spiritual practitioners or something, pastors or whatever. So they're not seeking something from the drug. In fact, they were in service for the experiment, possibly part of it, right? That didn't get stuck in the loop of trying to fix themselves by taking the drug, or needing the happiness that they already know drugs provide, and when happiness turns out to be so much better than anybody ever suggested, they forget, they don't listen to the people about the consequences and become drug addicts. So you can't dismiss drugs, but those two sides, right? That it's kind of like consciousness has already experienced that as a separate, limited experience. Imagining itself as a human being, already knows it's not, because it has to eat other life, right? So it's already part of that cycle of taking something from outside of yourself, and taste and nutrition and whatever, it's all right there. But we're deadened and lost to that. So there's that volume of drugs that is also eating. They all come from life already anyway.
It's an extension of the same.
So so it just had to become louder, because we were approaching those limits of limitation. That and that's, on the one hand, that's pretty severe and loud, but it's for just this thing that can't really be put in words, because obviously it wasn't enough for humans in our story for food to be enough to show us our oneness with life, and
we needed some extreme
that peace and joy that that some people or some of life as people experience, so because I just get concerned and wonder how to put the drug experiences in words that it is, don't do drugs if you can hear the warnings and it's for you not to do drugs. I don't even know how to say it.
Yeah.
Because obviously if it's for you to do drugs, you're going to do them.
Yeah, no, exactly.
But just be really careful with the consequences.
Because getting back to that spectrum, you can end up in the magical schizophrenic world, and you can get stuck there.
Yeah. I tried to kill myself and stuff like that. That was the opposite of magical. But so there's all kinds of severe consequences that, that's why the emergency surgery kind of makes sense. It's like, you don't do that. You don't treat it like plastic surgery.
Yeah.
It's something that's kind of some kind of care. But then if you're too careful a person, that's why you need drugs.
There's no answer. It's the end of all of it. But No, and I think it's socially responsible to be like, don't ever go out and do a psychedelic drug because of any story I say or any story anyone else says. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we're lucky enough to live in a time where you can do it responsibly, I think, and I think more and more you're going to be able to do it. MAPS, the multiple disciplinary study for psychedelics, that we may be in the place where you can do psilocybin or MDMA in California.
Yeah, that might be part of the collective emergency surgery, right?
Yes, exactly. I was thinking that when you were talking about
it's not that it's not what's needed, but in the end, to be putting that out there about, hey, this swinging thing that what we're not, in order to be what it's not, has to swing back and forth from one side to the other, and so is it really needed, and the care that needs to be put there too. Yeah,
exactly. So that's all. I always default to safety, and please don't ever say that you did something because of my recommendation, because I ain't recommending it. I'm reporting. It's the same thing in the non-dual world. Like, hey, you want to go listen to hundreds of hours. I don't know if I've listened to hundreds. I probably have by this point of Zen bitch slap, and you'll end up in getting some sort of the benefit that I got out of it. Like, don't do that. Like, just listen to your freaking heart first. But I am reporting, hey, I listened to hundreds of hours of Paul talking, and it created a whole lot of traveling lighter and a whole lot of cool fruits from the tree of this little story.
And to get okay with what's being said up to this point, and not to be overly worried about what's going to be taken out there, because you had your experience with what no escape was initially a depressing term, right? What do you call it?
There's no escape.
Depressing, whatever. As opposed to that Escher-like flip where you realize, just accepting that which isn't real can't escape, and without making it seem real.
Totally. And there's some sort of
totally different.
There's some sort of empathy and compassion here for remember being on the other side of it and hearing, hey, there's no escape, and the terror that seemingly put in. And so I don't want to go to someone and say, hey, there's no escape. But at the same time, from where I seem to stand, hey, there's no escape, hallelujah. It's the greatest news.
And to trust, nothingness, no preconception or whatever. So if you're going to say to somebody, the wisdom of no escape in the context of them being relieved, that they'll hear it and not take it the other way. It's important to be relieved ourselves, right? It's like one thing that I would always emphasize for people now is openness means listening for what something is saying for you. As opposed to this idea that you're really supposed to understand, and be open. How can I be open to this if at the same time
because you're creating layers
or whatever?
Of crap.
It's just a momentary value that, like on the last Zen bitch slap video, there was some snarky commenter that used the word bullcrap, to describe Paul's talk or something. But he also mentioned something else. Like, is anybody getting out of this? Or something that didn't sound like it was not wanting some valuable participation. Somebody else did think that and called him a troll, but whatever. And so I phrased in my response that what I just said about openness being listening for what something's saying for you, and it might be just a segment. And it's equally valuable with that is, or not valuable, but equal. What that also is not having to be contrary. You know, like recognizing contrariness is keeping you from hearing what is being said for you.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And to me that is probably the way I'm going to go most often. That allows me to be present, to know that something is for me and you. Like for me to say it is already, it needs to be said, you know, for the life's experience as me, and then trusting as best as I can that obviously there's no you, me, so it's for you in the way that it's going to seem to be for you. Like I might be totally surprised, right? And Paul says this about how people come back to him, right? But without that present relief, seemingly as me, then I'm not sharing that in the moment.
Exactly.
Right? So that's the best way it comes out for me. Is like listen for what's, because that, and I learned this in AA, you know, because you know, openness is a big deal there, and just would make me mad. That like when the suggestion one day at a time didn't make any sense. Like, what are these people talking about? You know, like the day is so long.
Yeah. Well, that's a long.
That's a long fucking time, and they're pretending like that makes sense. You know, but when I realized, for me, that when this openness thing happened, that something that seemed workable made sense to me, is I could get through whatever segment that seemed to be tempting me that I needed to use. Like if I had to go out for an evening, okay, you know, to be around people and socialize and stuff, but I can get through that.
That's
evening.
Your day.
Yeah,
I'm just thinking one moment at a time would be another way of saying it, or something.
And certainly that made more sense.
Yeah.
You know, although then that became the existential
forever.
Thing. For a second, you know, like, oh my god, that's not work.
But you broke it down into a digestible thing for you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna come back, and that's my one day at a time. Yeah. That's my victory.
Exactly.
And
so
that's how you.
So instead of being contrary to how something is said, or whether other people are going to be being fake or having sheep-like submission to it, you know, and they don't even know what they're saying. They're just repeating it. Yeah. Instead of concentrating on that, the avenue of what is saying for me, but it has to be equal with recognizing the dropping of the assumption that you have to be skeptical and devil's advocate and contrary, or because you're essentially being suspicious of life of these other people.
Yeah.
When something is being said.
Uh-huh.
And so to get to that place of, it's, you know, so it's all kind of circled around. So it's trust, right? That you can't be open if you're not trusting.
Yeah.
So this is all contextualized, but that element of, gosh, you know, like I want to be available and allow the best opportunity for you to hear what's meant for you. And this person did reply with, "Oh, thanks. You sound, you know, like you're in a good place." Yeah. He didn't like the other person, you know, calling him a troll and stuff like that. Yeah. So, you know, that's kind of a hinge point with because, you know, obviously that for you that's taboo as far as like, you know, suggesting to anybody that there's a you there, you know, like. But so that's a background too. I mean, it's all.
Exactly. Yeah. Holy shit. Okay. You just went on an amazing run, right? I love that. Yeah. I don't always go back to listen. I'm gonna go back and find that timestamp because you. Okay, so I've said this before. I said this earlier to Sharon. I've said this is the highest compliment coming from me. I know it can be. Again, we're getting right back to what we were just talking about. Some people could take this as being an insult. It's not. This is a very high compliment coming from me and my predilections. When you talk, when you go on a stream of consciousness like that, I only can get in those places when I'm high.
Oh.
When I'm on an edible, and I shouldn't say I only can, but it's much easier to when I'm on an edible. And when you talk, there's similar to almost like Paul, I see the mental state trying to grab on to things, and it's slippery in such a way, but it makes sense in another way. That's so cool, and that's I'm again, my last thing I want to do is make you feel self-conscious about it.
No, that's actually a gift because self-consciousness, embarrassment would probably be a big thing of what I'm not history.
Okay.
And so
probably for all
the
of us.
funny opportunity to see self-consciousness, as opposed to, like Paul would say, be what's it called, at it,
seeing from it,
on the other side of it, or whatever, within it, whatever, not the seeing of it. So, and the golden oldie thing, it's always not always gonna be there, but
I'm worthless, I'm unlovable, everybody, I'm the outsider, everyone's laughing at me, whatever.
It's just so I'm sure life is going to seem to present plenty of opportunities,
of course,
to what do you call that, give it a different meaning.
Recontextualize it. It's a great way, like you've been saying. Like Paul talks about, the day that you hit rock bottom was the worst day of your life, and you look back on it and it becomes the best day of your life. It's
like when you say the mental state trying, it's like I can almost, and so that's why there's the needing to talk on different tangents and points, right? Because it's the best way to do some kind of a creative mandala or something like that.
Totally.
Instead of really hashing out some node that doesn't go anywhere. And so like when you
that's
said,
a great fucking metaphor. I love that. Yeah. Mandala.
So like when you say that you don't want to make me self-conscious, I can feel that still realm of I mean, it's not even a realm, because it's wanting to go into a room or something like that.
It wants to create.
Because like right now, me trying to say something, like the best way I could say it is like I mean I kind of can remember how much more self-conscious. This is like being on acid.
I feel like I'm on it right now. That's what I'm saying. I'm high. Whenever I talk to you, I'm basically high.
Or no, more like pot, because I would get paranoid on pot. So
it feels
similar.
You and pot are like cousins, or telling you like your consciousness and that. Yes.
So
we touch similar places.
Falling into it, like that would be is different than just like, okay, well, I don't have to fall. I mean, I'm not even saying I don't have to fall into it. It's just
it's available to see it. And it's available to see it. I always say from pot all the time, it's like you're stuck in it, and then you especially on an edible, you then you're stuck in the basketball, and then pot brings you above the basketball, and you see it from all angles. You go, oh my god, I was so convinced. The classic example is I was so convinced that this person is trying to fuck me, or have a resentment, or that I'm totally screwed about this financial thing, or this and that, and then pot, or it doesn't always have to be pot, maybe it can be Mike Z, maybe it can be something else, will take you above it, and you go, oh my god, I was stuck in this thing, and now not only can I see one perspective that I'm separate from it, I see a million other opportunities.
Well, that's when it becomes funny.
Exactly. Then you laugh.
As opposed to just one that's kind of going back and forth. Like if people are talking about you, that kind of thing. So you're just stuck on that one. And the funny thing is that it is giving you the opportunity. It is getting to see it, because that's happening all the time, and you just don't pay attention to that, right?
Yeah.
So now you're
your spotlight is on one little piece of what's available. This is an Alan Watts thing. And then the floodlight comes in, and you see all the surrounding stuff that was there, but you just weren't conscious of it.
Exactly. So. But like, like what did Paul say when we were at that dinner, and I had talked about the relapse, and he said that but you're different. So that was more of a self-conscious reaction, right?
Okay,
I give him more meaning, and like I still remember that. So that is kind of an interesting experience that way.
It's so funny how so much of his stuff is completely impersonal. Like he's the most impersonal teacher I've ever found anywhere, and some of the little personal things just he says in passing, I'm sure he never thinks twice about, have stuck with me in that same way, right? On either side, one thing that sticks in my head is he was talking about his flying squirrel suit idea, right? And he goes, that's the way I want to go out, put me in the flying squirrel suit, hit the morphine button, right? He goes, well, I have to trust somebody that will hit the button. And he looked around the table and he goes, Nick, you hit the button. And that for some reason stuck with me.
Oh, as something that bothered you?
No, like I felt like he trusts me.
Oh, okay.
Like,
but something in particular, yeah.
You know, that was like I could think of a negative one. There's probably a few, but that was the one of like in the end to hit the button of whether to kill him basically is what he's saying, but to hit the button, he trusts me, and that it's a weird and all the teachings and all the cool stuff. That one little weird personal thing is stuck here,
And it provides out because like the pot example, how it's always going on, but and when you get to see it can make you paranoid because you're just stuck on that one. Yeah. It's because besides the self-consciousness, that has its duality of social anxiety.
Yeah.
Right? Because I can only be self-conscious if I'm wondering, obviously, about how other people are thinking about me, unless I get stuck in my own mind that seems to be revealing this stuff. But it's the same thing. And
that's your example, and looking at you too. Actually, when you're stuck in your own mind, it's the imaginary character,
it's the dualism,
or Nick
projected.
Examining consciousness.
Yeah. Because so like with you and Paul, I actually have an example where when you mentioned how many kids you had, and he said something like, "Oh, you better stop having them."
Yeah.
You better stop that. I had, anxiety.
Oh, really? That's so funny.
That you were offended or something like that.
Oh, yeah. No, well, so being a young guy with so many kids, I get so many examples of reactions, So it's funny. So his reaction was just kind of par for the course. A lot of the reactions are, oh, it's surprise, and oh, wow, you have so many kids. Why do you have so many kids? Or, and a lot of older guys will go, you need to stop having kids. You know? And then the jokes will come in. You need me to teach you how to use a condom and and it's just, it doesn't do anything to me because that's become par for the course. The surprises are when people aren't surprised that I have a lot of kids. There's two I can think of, and one really stands out in my mind because I talked about him earlier today. One of my all-time heroes out there, my favorite podcaster, is Pete Holmes. I've talked to you about it before.
And Patrick, you talked about
it. Right. And I talked with him earlier about Sharon. So I met him outside of Cobb's Comedy Club right here in the city, right? And I went to his show, and then he came out afterwards, and he was taking pictures of people, and I waited patiently, and once he'd taken all the pictures, I went up. I gave him a couple books. I gave him one of Paul's books.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Which one?
The Having Never Left. Yeah, the most recent one. And then we talked a little bit, and I gave him the hey, because he's been in my life longer than Paul, I've been listening to his podcast for 6 years. Well, maybe 6.5 now, and I said, hey man, his podcast comes out every Wednesday. It still does to this day. I just listened to it earlier today. I said, for a lot of years your podcast was like my church service. When I had nothing, I knew at least I had one little anchor I could go and check in with this guy who just speaks to and I've got to watch his evolution over the 6 years, and it's paralleled mine in a lot of ways. It's just totally cool. And he was so warm and so oh, that's so cool, man. He gave me a hug. I remember he gave me 4 hugs because he kept going I would say something, he'd go, oh, let me come in for another hug. He kept counting up 3 hugs. And then I told him, I said, I have 5 kids and this and that, and he wasn't surprised. He's one of the only people ever that he was just that's really cool. There was no whoa, no shock, no nothing. It was just for some reason to him, it just made sense that I had 5 kids.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. Where
that stuck.
And I realized that it's only my meaning or interpretation.
Yeah, because in your world, you have no kids. So having 5 kids is something that I would be very self-conscious about.
So he would be the perfect foil to this conversation. And then the me knowing that doesn't get anywhere, right? It's oh, I should know better, right? Exactly. Or I'm, maybe I'm making him uncomfortable, and he wasn't even uncomfortable in the first place. Or so that's all that pot paranoia stuff, right?
Absolutely.
As opposed to, because he's a comedian, right? Right. So he, and you would never
makes sense.
And you would never add to that and make somebody feel bad. You would be just like him. You wouldn't have, just be that peaceful, relieved place, right?
He comes from the improv world too, which I think that I love. People that are really into improv. Robin Williams is maybe the ultimate example. People that are really into improv, I see a very spiritually type thing too, of the whole philosophy of yes and. I love to say that all the time. In life, I always go like, I'll say something absurd, and then somebody goes, "What the hell?" I'm like, "Can you just yes and me?" Like, and I do that with my kids too.
Yeah.
They'll say totally crazy things, and I'll just be like, I'll just yes and them, like, "Oh yeah," and then I'll add on to it.
Yeah. No, that's one of the best things. Like supposedly the Buddha would always say, "Yes, that's," to somebody that brought up something. "Yes, that's true," and and didn't
because it never becomes the truth. It's just a truth, and
yeah.
Exactly, because that's fucking life, right? Like, you're never gonna reach the end. There's never.
And that's the kind of Escher-like thing that like you actually can't be any communication between like the yes and both and not excluding no, right?
You can't reach.
And that which will only. But see, like even saying it right now, since it's not excluding no, I can't see somebody trying to insist on a no.
That's it.
As a no.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of time, so to speak.
It's all relative.
It's a matter of time whether they want to become agreeable, or hear what's for them being said. Whatever, and you just let it go. If because you're not interested in knowing, NO-ING with somebody, so you let them go their way in peace, right? And if there's a real them doing that, it really was just about you, right?
Exactly.
To just allowing even that knowing.
Two things hit for me big time on that. Is one, it reminds me of Paul saying you'll lose interest.
And he does, right?
Yeah. Like, okay, well, on the Zoom on, I think it was Saturday, I don't remember. Somebody was getting into it with him big time about what is intention, or what is attention? Do you control the attention, or where's the birthplace of attention, or whatever? And he entertained it for a little bit, and then he started going like, yeah, and are you noticing I'm kind of losing interest in this discussion right now? You see how it's kind of just not interesting to me anymore? That's kind of what it is. He was trying to use a real life example, and this guy was very interested and very intent on getting to the purpose of intention, or the purpose of interest, right? And he's like, so he was like giving the real world example of like, I'm losing interest in this discussion. That's what it's like. That's what losing interest in self is like. Self trying to lose interest in self is a whole lot of interest in self. Losing interest is just kind of okay, we beat the dead horse.
And it was what it was.
The other thing that came in for me when you were talking about that was back to my podcast with Patrick. I won't do it justice, but he dove into all the different ways that you can, all the different traditions or techniques that point back to non-duality, or pick your poison, emptiness, void, all. And one of the ones he used was logic, and that you can.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That was really cool, right?
The presumption that starts with A is A.
Yeah.
I never heard that one before.
You can't get around that, basically. And so your little spiel felt like an extension of that same, you can go a million different ways, but you got to have a seeming starting point, right? And that seeming starting point has to come out of, for lack of a better way to say it, nothing. Emptiness. Void. Nothing. And you can, I guess, sort of mental, they call it jnana yoga, using the mind to go beyond the mind. Technique is you just go and examine. Can you find, can you get behind a thought? Can you get behind?
Yeah. You know Michael Taft?
No. Okay.
He's a local meditation teacher,
right.
Non-dual, kind of well-known.
Local San Francisco?
Yeah, he actually has something here. And I was watching a video of his where he was presenting a map after a lot of disqualifiers about how you never do that, right? Why you don't do that, how people want to get to the end of the map right away and whatever, right? But it's like it has its helpful context.
Gotta use something,
And it's broken down into four, so it's like the first is the cognitive level, the last is just awareness, not as a level anyway, but that's what number 4 anyway, and then 2 is what was it, perceptual, or instead of having a concept of an apple, you actually taste and you experience red or whatever. And but anyway, so I only did the first one, and he was inclusive and didn't poo-poo thinking, and he actually called it concept meditation.
Yeah.
And the point is, though, that you're not jumping back and forth like if you got a problem at this store, that if you take the time aside, right? So you're not going to do it at the store while you're having the problem.
Yeah.
But you can step aside and okay, why did I think I have that problem? And what is the nature of the problem? And you can just really.
Totally. You can go through those levels, those layers, yeah.
So that it's kind of like would be a Byron Katie. Is that true?
Exactly.
So she's
I freaking love that.
Yeah.
As far as a useful tool, her set of questions, is that true? Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and that inclusiveness that Michael Taft was displaying by that, it was really cool, and I took it as an opportunity to go to Greg, because I just like finding areas where we might be able, where it occurs to me to intersect in vocabulary, or what I hear something said that I could tell him. And so this was, and he used the example of where do you come from to cognitively meditate. And so some people might go the direction of parents and geography, and some people about being made out of matter. We've come from the death of stars, or the birth of stars.
Yeah. The Big Bang.
So that would all. So essentially, that all is a circular, unifying experience, right? That it's not going to go anywhere, and that's if similar to drugs, that can not be something that you suggest people do, but for those that is gonna produce a less separate feeling, literally, right? Because your parents and dead stars are the same thing.
Exactly. Yeah, and in a way, it's all about where do you divide it? Where do you pick the starting and ending points?
Yeah.
Because it is all relative, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so so he knows I'm big on non-duality, so I'm not just leaving it at just the cognitive, but I'm also needing to be what he enjoys. So that's why I inserted off I'm gonna do a lounge act for you.
Yeah, there you go.
Because in the lounge you go up to somebody, hey, where do you come from?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So that's how I started it. And
non-duality role play. I love it.
and but the end of it was, in the present now, do you I essentially said, do you come from anything other than me or the question I asked? Where do you come from? Right? It's just we are that for each other. Relationship is there is nothing. And this was also because this has been important for me, that I am, the experience I am, equals, and equals can be like a bridge, the rest of life. All of life has its focus in an I, right? That is nothing except the rest of life, right?
Yes.
And
holy shit.
the I am is the experience of the rest of life. Yeah? Yeah, so why wouldn't I want to try to find a way to share that with Greg, that balancing that, speaking of self-consciousness, like superiority complex, like I should tell, and I don't. I have such a great time, compared to AA, how we were supposed to relate, whether you're supposed to have alcohol in the house, or whether I was supposed to express my feelings about whether we had alcohol in the house. And the non-duality, you don't, you keep letting go of any preconception of any future, how am I going to?
Absolutely.
And if I have a how am I going to, it just arises and goes away, right?
Yeah.
And so I was able to go have a lounge act with him.
Yeah,
that was
man.
great.
So as you were talking about that, what was coming up for me was going back to when a lot of the big non-duality fireworks first started coming up between your guy, finding Fred Davis, and then a couple months later, I found this other guy, Michael Rodriguez, and then I found Paul. Paul's been sort of the end of the road so far.
Dead end.
Yeah. Which I think he'd be proud to hear.
Yeah.
The last answer, at least for now. But that I would, the realizations would pop up, right? And there would be, I think, going back to the unified theory of mental health, I think this is very much on the magical thinking, schizophrenia side, is you want to share it with people. Right?
Yeah.
And that's something I saw in my buddy that became a little unhinged, it was like we need to go change the world.
Yeah.
And that's almost a cliche of the 60s, right? We got to put LSD in the water. We need everybody to see what we're seeing, right? And so that can come in the non-dual realizations where you go, I want to share it with everybody, right? And that can create a whole lot of suffering because you're going to go seemingly try to share it with them. They're not going to get it. You're going to feel alone, and you're going to go back to thinking that you're crazy, which is a great reason why having a Sangha is so freaking amazing. That you gather once a week and you, for me personally, for the action figure, oh, I'm not crazy. There's other people that, resonate with this, and, this podcast, and this is an extension of sharing more of that. But I was thinking about that of like, over time, the realizations, as you were saying, can pop up, and you can go, is there an opportunity where it would be useful, skillful, easy to kind of share this with someone? And then very quick, there's not a lot of energy on it. Just like, no, there isn't. Cool. That one was just for me. That one was just for the, cool. And what I've noticed over time is I'm connecting with people at work in not the kind of world, in a construction, male, testosterone dominant world. There are a few females out there too, but that you would not think people would be into talking about this kind of shit, this philosophical, seemingly stuff, that I'm finding so many people that are really open to it, and it blows my mind. I could not have ever imagined. And you've seen I've brought a few to talks, and I've sent the videos to a few, and it's never ceases to surprise me, that there's a lot of people out there that this contextualizes, this frames a mystery that's been going on in their consciousness for a while. And
well, if it happened to in this experience, I can't imagine why it wouldn't be really available to a lot of people.
Exactly, yeah. So when you're on the magical end of the spectrum, you just go, how does everyone not get it? And then
not how do they not get it, but how it must not be working in them somehow.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's and not being the agent so much.
Exactly. And
because it has to be happening, so why do I need to be?
Yeah, I know. Well, that's the thing too, is it is happening whether you talk about it or not.
Yeah, and that's kind of like that openness and the trusting. I have to use the word being available, noticing pleasure.
Yes.
As
100%.
As seemingly this experience.
Yep.
So instead of censoring, oh, Greg's going to think this or that, noticing a kind of joy that is kind of comes across as playful for me. That
totally
kind of that's the way that I can start to appreciate it, I guess. So I don't have like pure joy, like it kind of usually has to be made a little funny or something like that.
Sure, yeah, silly. I like
silly. Yeah. So feels like a lounge jack. I'm gonna go do lounge jack, right?
Yeah.
But that's what I mean. But that kind of like back, that's joyful enough. That's pleasurable enough, and then that self-reinforcing trusting, right? Then you're gonna do it again and again, and it doesn't. You don't have to take drugs. You appreciate that little level of connection, play. So just example of food would be the best. Like Charles Eisenhower has one of my most unbelievable meditative exercises, so to speak. It's a food yoga program he has. Probably already told you about it.
I think you have, yeah.
Yeah, but
I like it.
And in fact, you actually use expectation, not against itself, but with itself. So like, going to take a taste of food, expect what it's going to taste like.
Yeah.
And he totally tricked me because this is not, because it was new, like as soon as you hear something, then you start to think you know what it means. Yeah. So I didn't know what this meant. And then taking a bite of food and realizing that for the first time that expectation had nothing to do with what it was actually like. Right?
Yeah.
So, and that's what he uses the term pleasure. So instead of dieting and control and unaware of, all that stuff that's driving you.
Unconsciously shoving food in your face. Yeah.
You trust pleasure. So you just really, be present with a taste.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's, it doesn't say a lot, but.
Yeah, well, it doesn't, but it's huge.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point,
in so many ways, I mean, so the grossest, not gross like gross, but like the biggest example is you get pleasure out of buying the diet book, right? And you're right, you know what I mean? And you have all these plans about starting the diet and losing the weight, and then you never read the book, right? but you got the pleasure hits of, I got a plan to lose weight, right? And then now there's many steps down the road, and what I'm saying, I think at the end of that road, for me personally, is just, can I taste this food and enjoy it? Because you can enjoy damn near everything. You can enjoy a carrot. It can taste sweet and amazing, right?
And you never have a real preconception. I mean, we think we have a preconception, but you actually...
You don't know it until you're eating it.
Yeah.
Exactly. You can think about it. You can watch videos. There's a whole... I love... Anthony Bourdain was one of my favorite. I've watched every single one of his shows multiple times over. And I have this cool little history with him of, I would watch his show late at night when the babies want to go to sleep, to keep me awake. So I always kind of watch it in this somewhat psychedelic sleepy state of like being on low sleep with my baby watching Anthony Bourdain. But the joke is it's food porn, right? Because you can't taste the food, but you're watching all this amazing food, and and you're removed from it in that certain way. And then food becomes it's a drug, of course, hugely a drug, right? And all the expectations set around it and all the stuff. And when it really comes down to it, it's the taste in the moment that you're tasting it. And there, like you said, you can't, no matter what promise. I love. Oh fuck! Have you heard of the book Why Buddhism is True by Robert Wright?
I think so.
Yeah.
But I don't know it.
It's the coolest Western take, I think, on Buddhism, and he talks about how evolution is designed, and it makes perfect sense, is designed to overpromise and underdeliver.
Oh, we've talked about this when we went to this the Green Apple bookstore that time we went to dinner. I remember that.
Yeah, exactly, right.
That was really cool.
Yeah. So food is an example. Your mind tells you that chocolate cake will be the ultimate answer. Like it'll be your happiness, it'll bring you, peace and yada yada yada. And then you go and you eat the chocolate cake, and then normally you're so stuck on the idea of what the evolutionary brain told you it was going to bring you, you're not actually paying attention to the taste in the moment, right? Yeah. And sex is the same thing, and it overpromises and can underdeliver. Now the Buddhism little hack on it is actually, if you see that drive, it has its own drive, it has its own purpose. That's its evolution, it's survival and passing on your genes to the next generation. If you realize it will never bring you the happiness it promises, and then this is kind of maybe my own little take on it, there's a greater peace and contentment and happiness beyond any of the promises of that biology, of that evolutionary drive, of that mental state. And that's kind of the punchline of his little book there. But all that was coming up for me when you were talking about, like, what's the best diet plan possible? Sit there and taste your food.
Yeah. And again, like Michael Taft, that to point out and not be contrary to, there is pleasure in getting the diet book.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Don't deny that or say that you're bad. Like, no, that's the brain.
You just emphasize that, actually, in a way, and then maybe the best way is to suggest, and there can be a shortening of the time, that there's this time equals suffering, essentially, to me.
And you can see it for what it is.
Yeah.
You don't believe the promise that it's actually.
It's your experience. I mean, anybody.
Your subjective.
Yeah, you want somebody to have their own experience. That's the idea, and it can be as simple as the food thing. Yeah. And even like so-called appreciating that about negative things, that like, like if I break down, so-called break down to a smaller time period, and not have like, and question the preconception that I already know what this is like. Yeah. Like the first time I think it happened to me was Greg jiggles his leg like this, and I was seeing him doing that, and I was irritated. Of course, I was irritated at him, right? Like, why would I be irritated if it's not at somebody being a victim of something, right?
Yeah.
And annoyed that I, can be so petty. Yeah. And what's probably obvious to like maybe you and anybody listening is that all was irritation, right? I saw the irritation that was, you could say, was in my mind.
Yeah.
Supposedly given the blessing of seeing it out there in a tangible way, but while it's insisting that it's out there and being done to it, that's the irritation, as opposed to, like, let's say, floating above the mind, and not personalizing it, right?
That's it.
And his leg actually stopped. That's a good story anyway. So that could be kind of like, the coaxing, the gentle, kind patience, whether it's with another person or your present experience, like somehow narrowing it seemingly, which to the mind is going to sound claustrophobic and like, fuck you, like, I'm not going to narrow this down.
Yeah.
But that's where the
almost like there is a narrowing that you're not doing.
So if I give up my idea of preconceptions of, leg jiggling having, I probably did this, leg jiggling having to mean uncomfortable. Like, how do I know what meaning he's giving it?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so if it's not bothering him, why does it have to bother me? It's assuming that it definitely means irritation.
Yeah.
Or discomfort or whatever.
You're convinced.
Right. Why am I? Yeah. I mean, like a baby. What's the baby gonna do with the jiggling? Like, oh, that's kind of fun.
Exactly.
So
create
with
whole
that
meaning with
opportunity to to question, right? That opened up that window on a narrower time field, right? Just and then just like a completely empty looking at irritation. But that's not irritation, though. If you're looking at it, you're not in it.
Exactly. You're like a scientist examining irritation.
Yeah.
And you see, and like Paul will talk about it sometimes. I really like it. You see the manufacturing of it.
Yeah.
I like that. You see, once you've seen the manufacturing of self, this thing that you've been completely convinced you are a self called Mike Z or Nick Bebo. You're completely convinced of it, and then once you see that it's actually manufactured, you go, oh shit. I was convinced I was that product.
Yeah.
And now I saw the making of that product. So what saw the making of that product? And
it's so peaceful. It's just so.
I know.
it's so.
Yeah, I know. And I talked about it earlier with Sharon, that the big shift, and I've talked with Keith about this too, that the thing that's been landing for me big on the talks is when he talks about, the selfing, that process. Will never seemingly stop, just like your heart won't stop beating, just like the lungs won't stop breathing. But that process, seemed to, your whole life seemed to imply a self, and a shift happens. The cart is, the horse is seen to be in front of the cart, and the same process now is all used to.
Oh yeah. When we had our reunion in. San Rafael.
We talked about
that. That is huge to just have it all be.
It's not like I have to stop selfing and then I'll be. I have to stop what I'm not and then I'll be what I am. It's like what you're not is gonna go forever, but you either see it identified as what you're not, or you see it from what you are. And then the bigger punchline on top of it is you've only ever seen it from what you are. So. Hallelujah.
Wanted to experience what it might be like.
Of course.
To do that.
And that's again getting into the stoner thought thing.
Exactly.
Like
getting up out of the movie, and you see the person getting up out of the movie,
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and you go like, oh, I actually wanted all of this. And, something. What I am. If you really, I like the idea of what I am wanted to get lost in it.
Yeah.
That's a very Alan Wattsy thing of like, God goes. I don't know what separation feels like because there actually is no separation. So let me go get lost in separation. Let me get so lost that I'm utterly convinced.
Let me evolve.
Right. Just to come back to the realization. Oh wait, there never was any separation.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what the hell this dreaming is.
Well, I think that's the opportunity for humans. Humans will normally turn this into a proud narcissistic thing, to be able to awake that animals can't awaken because they're not asleep.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the ability to think.
You've said that before. That stuck with me.
Yeah.
Animals.
It's both humble and yet unique.
Yeah, of course.
Right. I mean, it's like what it's not. It's not all about achieving anything.
Yeah.
It's about just experiencing what it's like to realize you don't have to achieve anything, and that's its own little. Different experience.
Exactly. It's its own unique experience of this.
Yeah.
And in one one way of looking at it is it's no different than the experience of the cat or the dog.
Yeah,
and
because they're having it all the time, but they don't have the contrast.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you gotta maybe pay your dues of feeling like.
Yeah, how much contrast do you want?
Yeah,
That's all. That you have the free will to eventually realize you don't have the free will to do it.
Exactly.
But you get that little video game experience.
Yeah.
For nothing.
For no. Yeah.
Good thing.
Yeah. For no thing. Exactly.
Yeah.
Man, I really just want to go go for a walk in the park now.
Yeah, you want it?
Yeah, I do, okay. For real. Like, this is so much fun, and it just makes me like, I want to just go outside and look at some trees now. Like,
you want to go with me to the playground?
I would fucking love it, man. Dude, thank you so much. I'm so glad that I decided to come by. I know Zoom would have been just the same, but we didn't, again, I did this with Sharon too. We didn't even mention the fact that there's a pandemic going on, and,
Oh, yeah, by the way.
I always, my little meta, being self-conscious for the podcast, and, thinks about when, I went into this deep with my buddy Checo that I did one with him last week, of the person that stumbles upon this recording 50 years from now, and on whatever YouTube is 50 years from now, some weird interactive, whatever, and because so much of my fun experience in awakening and revealing this stuff has been through Alan Watts and Ram Dass recordings in the 70s, and they didn't know what the world would be in 2020 or who the hell I would be to stumble upon it. So that popped into my mind, like, hey, by the way, there's a pandemic going on.
Yeah, no, you can totally, it adds a dimension of appreciation that's just phenomenal.
Exactly, man.
As far as the pandemic, like, the what do you call it, the cautionary thing or whatever, like, for me it's important to consider, like in AA, it's, any decision made from self or based on fear is what reproduces itself, gets itself in trouble, seems to get itself in trouble. Mm-hmm. So it's like, whatever, like if money situation, if spending a certain amount of money is out of fear because you're trying to, you're trying to avoid doing something else if you go shopping.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Versus.
It's like a drug. It is. Yeah.
Or the opposite, if you're not spending money because you're afraid of future penury, right?
Totally, yep.
The same action, different meaning is being given to it.
Yep.
And so it's not like it's fearful to actually try to answer the question.
Exactly.
But the best thing that can be said is to wonder, like, am I getting together with Nick because I'm in fear of having to change my lifestyle? Like, if I can't be with people, fuck the world. That's kind of fearful, right? As opposed to, like, can I? And for somebody else, it would be something different. If taking easy steps to be safe is less fearful. It's just like, why can't I?
Yeah.
So, to me, this is less fearful. This is representing not fear.
I love it. Totally. Yeah. I'm totally in the same space, and I appreciate it. And it's cool to
and then you can respect other people, right?
Exactly. And if they are in the fear of, I don't want you in the same building as me, I can respect that too.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's a momentary thing that you can't argue about as far as, like, you guys are definitely bad for having gotten together.
Yeah. You're
and
gonna
then
talk
if I respect somebody else later on, that is not contrary.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it's funny for me, just as an action figure, I've never been the germaphobe at all.
Right.
The idea of putting on a mask, like, it's embarrassing, but I would laugh at people, and it's so funny, the shift happened in me of, like, this is socially responsible if I'm outside of the house, at the grocery store, if I'm going to could come within 6 feet of anybody else, I'm going to have the gloves and the mask. For me, for them, for humanity. And it just, once it made sense, it made sense. But there wasn't a lot of heavy moral anything to it. It just, and my work is essential work, so I'm going to go out, so I'm going to put on the uniform I need to put on to go out and do my work. And when I'm not, I'm not. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and it was just cool how it didn't have to, I could see the mental state could take any one of those branches and create a whole fucking drama about it, and it's
oh my God, yeah.
You know what I mean? And so this is another case of, like, do we do the Zoom? Do I come over by your house? You were into it, I was into it, and it was just cool. It's so cool that it wasn't based in fear. there's no baggage, there's no moral, you know what I mean? And I always get sappy towards the end of these podcasts and sentimental. So thankful to have a buddy like you, man. This is like going on a drug trip.
It's the best, Nick.
Right on, dude, for real. It's cooler than that just to come and talk, and let's go for a walk in the park.
Okay, let's go to the playground.
Love you, Mike.
I love you too.